Detective Sarah Morgan stood in the doorway of the old library, her eyes scanning the scene before her. The body of Mr. James Henderson, the wealthy owner of Henderson Manor, lay sprawled across his antique desk. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air. "What do we have?" Sarah asked Officer Tom Peters, who was taking notes nearby. "Mr. Henderson was found by his housekeeper at 7:30 this morning," Tom replied. "No signs of forced entry. The door was locked from the inside, and the key was still in the lock." Sarah moved closer to examine the body. Mr. Henderson was still wearing his reading glasses, and an empty teacup sat next to his lifeless hand. Nothing seemed disturbed in the room, except for a few books that had fallen from the shelf behind the desk. "Who was the last person to see him alive?" Sarah asked. According to the staff, there were 3 people who visited him last night. His daughter, Emily, his business partner, Mark Wilson, and his young secretary, Lisa Chen. They all left before 9 p.m. Sarah nodded, making mental notes. "And the time of death?" "The medical examiner estimates between 10 p.m. and midnight." The detective's attention was drawn to a small security camera in the corner of the room. "Does that work?" Tom shook his head. "It was damaged 2 days ago during a storm. Mr. Henderson was planning to have it fixed today." Sarah continued her inspection of the room. Everything was meticulously organized, books arranged alphabetically, papers stacked neatly, and expensive collectibles displayed in glass cases. Only the fallen books seemed out of place. As she picked up one of the books from the floor, something caught her eye. There, hidden behind the bookshelf, was a small black button. "What's interesting about this case," Sarah said, "is not what we can see, but what we can't see." She interviewed each suspect separately in the manor's drawing room. Emily Henderson, the victim's daughter, was a woman in her early 30s with red-rimmed eyes. "I came to discuss my inheritance," she admitted. "Father was planning to change his will. He said I was too irresponsible with money." Mark Wilson, the business partner, appeared nervous but maintained his composure. "James and I had a meeting about selling some company shares. He was considering retirement, but we couldn't agree on the terms." Lisa Chen, the secretary, was the last to be interviewed. "Mr. Henderson asked me to organize some old files. He was looking for something specific, but he wouldn't tell me what it was." Sarah returned to the library, this time focusing on the teacup. She lifted it carefully, examining the bottom. A faint smile crossed her face. "I think our silent witness has something to say," she murmured. The next morning, Sarah gathered all 3 suspects in the library. The room felt smaller with everyone present, the tension palpable in the air. "Mr. Henderson's death was no accident," Sarah began. "It was carefully planned murder." She walked to the bookshelf, pointing to the fallen books. These books didn't fall by accident. They were knocked down when the killer was searching for something Mr. Henderson had hidden. Sarah pressed the black button behind the shelf, and a small compartment opened. Inside was a USB drive. Mr. Henderson was old-fashioned in many ways, but he knew the value of digital security. This drive contains evidence of embezzlement from his company money being siphoned off into offshore accounts. Mark Wilson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "But the really interesting evidence," Sarah continued, "came from an unexpected witness, the teacup." She held up the cup for all to see. Mr. Henderson was left-handed. "We know this from his writing and the arrangement of items on his desk. But the teacup handle was turned to the right, and there are lipstick marks on the rim." Lisa Chen's face went pale. "Miss Chen, you brought Mr. Henderson his usual evening tea, didn't you? But last night, you added something extra." When he discovered your involvement in the embezzlement scheme, you had to silence him. You thought you'd cleaned the cup thoroughly, but you missed a spot of your lipstick. The fallen books were a nice touch, making it look like he might have had a heart attack while reaching for them. But you made one crucial mistake. You turned the cup the wrong way when you placed it back on the desk. Lisa Chen broke down, her carefully maintained composure crumbling. He found out everything, she sobbed. He was going to expose us. Mark promised me a share of the money if I helped him with the accounts, but Mr. Henderson discovered the transfers. Mark Wilson tried to run, but was quickly apprehended by Officer Peters. As Sarah watched them being led away in handcuffs, she picked up the teacup one last time. Sometimes, she said to Officer Peters, the smallest details speak the loudest. Emily Henderson approached Sarah with tears in her eyes. Thank you, Detective Morgan. Father always said the truth has a way of coming out. Sarah nodded, thinking about how a simple teacup, a silent witness to murder, had helped solve the case. In her years as a detective, she'd learned that it was often the smallest, most overlooked details that told the biggest stories. The morning sun continued to stream through the library windows, illuminating the dust particles that still danced in the air, now witnesses to justice being served.